All right. Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Thomas Doherty on the topic of hiking and mental health. And today I'll be asking him some questions about how time in nature can impact our mental well-being. Many of us have experienced a boost in our mood after we hike, and many of us know intrinsically that time in nature feels good. The whole field of eco-psychology looks at the mind-nature relationship. It does so both on an individual level about how we are impacted when we spend time in nature, as well as a global level looking at humanity and the relationship with the environment and nature. So I'm going to let Thomas go into greater detail on that whole field of study here in a few minutes. But my hope for today is that you'll take away a deeper understanding of how time outdoors can benefit your mental health and also be able to articulate these concepts on the reflections following your hikes. I'm going to pull up Thomas's credentials here because I don't want to leave anything out. So Dr. Thomas Doherty is a prominent voice in the field of ecotherapy, and we met a few years ago when I was beginning my private practice outdoors as a mental health therapist. And he has since become my supervisor, which means that he supports my clinical work as an ecotherapist. He is a licensed psychologist who practices both environmental and clinical psychology, and he helped found the eco-psychology program at Lewis and Clark College. He has a background in leading wilderness therapy, as well as time acting as a professional rafting guide in the Grand Canyon. In the present day, Thomas works in private practice and trains mental health professionals in ecotherapy. And in his work with clients, he specializes in supporting people who have environmental concerns related to the climate crisis. He does much of his work outdoors on the trail. Sometimes we see each other out there in sessions. I'll link some of his work in the resource section, and you're welcome to check it out. Thomas, thank you so much for being here with us. I'm very grateful for your expertise. Before we dive into some of these questions and this interview process, can you share a bit about the ethical and cultural considerations for eco-psychology?
Sure. Well, thanks, Amy. I'm glad to be here and welcome to the students. Yeah, I think this is a great topic, and I'm glad you're doing a hiking course and also thinking about the mental health impacts or the benefits of hiking, because it is one of the big reasons I think that people do go hiking is because it feels good and it makes them feel good, and so I look forward to getting into that. But I think before we jump into any kind of talks about nature or use of the outdoors, it's helpful to step back a little bit and just recognize that these terms like nature and the outdoors or even hiking, they mean different things to different people. There's a lot of diversity in this area in terms of people's cultural backgrounds and what they know about being outdoors and where they grew up, the region, their family. Some people have had very positive experiences in nature and the outdoors, or was a part of their family's culture to go hiking or backpacking or hunting or fishing or going out on the ocean or things like that. Other people, not so much. They might not have been exposed to doing outdoor stuff, and it might be new or different to them. It can be scary for people. Even if it's not actually scary, it might be different or alien to them. They might not be confident. So I think it's just good to give permission to have different thoughts and feelings about this and not assume anything about people. Some people have a rural background, some people have an urban background. Certain cultures have different associations with nature and the natural world. People define nature differently. And then, of course, if you start getting into environmental issues, climate change, these days there's a lot of concerns about the natural environment, concerns about climate disasters. Some people have grief and loss, or confusion. So it's just I think I've learned to just name some of these factors in advance. That way, when they come up, we're not surprised, and then people feel included.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think that's really important with people coming from all types of backgrounds and different experience levels in this class.
Mm-hmm.
To keep that in mind as we explore and are going to be sharing with each other through our experiences.
Yeah.
Could you define what eco-psychology is?
Yeah, eco-psychology is a term that was coined, in the early 90s by by some people that were, kind of environmentally minded people that were looking at psychology and mental health therapy and kind of trying to draw links between mental health and the state of the planet or environmental issues. So it kind of flows out of an environmental mindset. And the way I've thought about this, I like the term eco-psychology because it's curious. Like it makes us think like, what is that? What does that mean? The idea we add eco to a lot of words, like as a prefix, eco counseling or, eco politics or eco literature, so it what it means is we're looking at whatever that topic is from an ecological perspective, like in terms of being on the planet or being part of natural systems and stuff like that. So when I'm teaching, one thing I've done is, to differentiate an eco-psychology approach from maybe like an environmental psychology approach, which is more academic or scientific approach. If I draw a box that says psychology, then I can put anything in that box and then I can study it from a psychological perspective. I could put in teaching or parenting or, sports psychology or whatever, and I could look at some of these things from a psychology perspective. And I can certainly put nature inside the psychology box, right? And I can look like, what's the psychology of people's nature experiences? What do they believe? What are their experiences? What are their values? What are their emotions? All this kind of stuff. Why do they want to make change and help the planet? How do you design a recycling program? So that's all super interesting. But another way to think about it is that's more of an eco-psychology way is to draw a box called ecology and then put a smaller box called psychology inside that. Then you're starting to look at psychology from a different lens that we're not used to. Traditionally, psychology is a human-focused field that comes out of the Western scientific tradition. So nature doesn't really have a place in psychology naturally. But when we do eco-psychology, people are trying to put nature first. And so the question would be, what would a psychology look like if we started from some principles about being part of nature, being part of the natural world? So that's kind of a provocative question, and even a radical question. It raises questions about, like, what do we do, and what's society built on, and what are the rights of nature, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a neat thing to ponder.
That really flips the common script in the field of psychology or mental health counseling even.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Could
So
you
even
tell
with
us-
ecotherapy, for example, I can use traditional therapy ideas and go outside. But what if I have eco and then put therapy inside of that? Then it's a different kind of story.
Yeah. Could you tell us what the connection is between time and nature and mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're covering some of the general health benefits of time spent in nature in the natural world and other parts of the course, but you know, just to simply name that, there's passive benefits of being in a safe natural setting. Our heart rates and blood pressure will go down, we'll relax. If we're in a safe, pleasing natural environment, we'll typically feel better, and whether we do anything or not, and we might not even notice it, but there's positive things happening in our body. And then there's more active benefits if we start thinking about nature and getting into the beauty of the place or observing. And then there's social benefits of doing things with other people, or psychological benefits of sports and challenge and taking on things and overcoming things. So there's a lot of different benefits, stress reduction, creativity. It helps our mind to calm, and things like that. Even if you take a 5-minute walk around the block, during your work day or after class, you clear your head for a few minutes. So the time factor, it's kind of what they say in the research is like, it's like a dose response. So you can think of a dose of nature, like 5 minutes. I'm busy, I take time to just walk around the block. That's a 5-minute dose, but I'll generally feel better, a little more. My head's cleared. I might have more clarity about a project I'm working on, or some perspective will come into my mind. I could do a 10-minute walk, a 30-minute, an hour, but the more time I spend in nature, the bigger the dose, and more likely I'll notice it as something. An hour will really change my mindset probably, and I'll come back feeling quite different. If I spend an afternoon or a whole day, then it's almost like a retreat. And then you can think about, like, people have had experiences hiking or backpacking, say they go away for a day and a night or a weekend, that'll kind of reset. That can reset yourself. If you have a good experience, it can reset yourself, can reset your sleep patterns. And then people do longer trips, like say someone goes hiking on the Pacific Crest Trail or something, and they're hiking for weeks or even months. Then you can see how this is kind of like it's like a life-changing experience. You get really a lot of time. So that time, beautiful settings will draw our attention and we'll look at them and enjoy them, but it doesn't demand all of our attention. So there's mental space to reflect on our life and to get some perspective. And that can be really healing. And, the more time we get, sometimes the better.
Absolutely. Thank you. How might students in this class go about integrating tools for their mental health while they're out hiking? And just for a little bit of context, students are typically hiking about 3 miles. So they're out there maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours at a time, once a week.
Yeah, well, one of the things I say when I'm doing walking therapy, you have to activate the benefits a little bit. If you just kind of go for a walk and you aren't thinking, you might not really pick it up. So, it's like any experience. If you start mindfully, if you're going on a hike and you mindfully begin the hike, you clear your head, maybe you walk in silence for a little bit, you take time to look around, experience the weather, check out the animals, the birds, thinking about your pace, stopping. It's the process, it's how you conduct it, just like any other kinds of things. I could go out to dinner with someone and just kind of start eating, but if I kind of sit down and thank the person and have a toast, you can have more of a special dinner, so similar with a hike. There's like a regular any old hike where you're not paying attention, and there's a hike where you're paying attention and have some sort of intention about, I'm going to go and relax, or I'm going to clear my head, or I'm going to spend time thinking about a thing, or I'm going to really focus on the bird sounds or the nature or the weather. I'm going to stop and do some mindfulness and just sit and close my eyes. Those are ways that we kind of activate the benefits of these environments. And then you'll probably talk a bit about just basic principles, but we want to kind of well, like I said, we want to balance our resources and our challenge. So like if I'm going on a hike, I want to make sure it's a hike that's appropriate for me, for my fitness, for the time I have, the weather, what I'm wearing, so I feel comfortable. So that, that also makes a big difference, whether you're going to have a good time and be able to be mindful, or whether you're going to be rushed or uncomfortable. Obviously, sometimes people will push themselves and do really challenging things, but if that's intentional, that can be really great. But if it's unintentional, that's not very helpful. So
yeah, so that intentionality and mindfulness can really be beneficial going into it.
Yeah.
Next question, you may have already answered this with what you just said, but I'll check. Why? Or let me rephrase that. How do people build a relationship with nature? Is it simply just that intentionality and presence and time, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it kind of depends on how people define nature. So that's another place where diversity comes in, and it can be a philosophical question. But even if we just have a simple definition of nature to be the natural world, or green spaces or other species, things somewhat outside of the mainly human realm, like parks or woods or the seashore, the desert, things like that. One way to think about building the relationship is reflecting on what your relationship is now. One kind of simple test that researchers do to think about people's relationship with nature is they just have 2 circles, one for the self and one for nature. And then you have some options. You can pick either an image where the self and nature circle are kind of far away, one where they're close, one where they're touching, one where they're just slightly overlapping, one where they're kind of mostly overlapping, and then one where they're completely overlapped, self and nature being one entity. And that's an interesting thought experiment to think about where that fits for you, for you or I, like how would we place ourselves? So that's a way to start, articulating our relationship with nature, because For some people, they see nature as an extension of their self. And
Mm.
for other people, nature is something separate. And it's also dynamic. It changes, if I'm out in a beautiful natural place and I've been spending several hours or I've been out camping, I might feel very interconnected with nature. But if I'm in a classroom or driving or, in front of a computer, I might feel far away. So it's somewhat dynamic. We have kind of a baseline, how we approach it, and then also it changes. But that gives us some tools to say, oh, I can actually moderate this. I can actually go to places where I can feel more connected, and that can be really healing and helpful.
Mhm. Wonderful. Okay. Why do you think there is value in a relationship with nature?
Why is there value in that? That's a good question. Um, um, hmm. Well, let's see. Why is there value? That again would pull from my other values. You know, it's such an obvious question. There's an old teaching story where there's two fish swimming. You might have heard this: two young fish swimming, and an old fish swims by and says, "How's the water, boys?" And then the fish leaves, and then afterwards, one fish says to the other, "What's water?" Right? Like they've just been in the water. They haven't even been conscious of it, right? They've never, you never thought about their conscious environment, right? So that's why I think it's important to have a relationship with nature, because we cannot survive without a healthy environment. We cannot survive but a few minutes without oxygen. We can't survive even a few days without water, or food. So it's something that we often in the Western world, in the first world, take for granted. I mean, obviously not everyone. There's diversity going to be in your class about what people's socioeconomic background and all that sort of stuff. But it's we already have a relationship with nature. We cannot not have a relationship with nature. So when we say building a relationship, it's kind of a funny thing we do in our society. But we cannot not have a relationship. So I think it's becoming more conscious of it
Mm.
and more careful about it and more protective of it. That doesn't mean you can have different political or social beliefs about things, but I think a lot of times our societies run as if we don't have any relationship, or it's just not necessary, which is it's just literally not true. So
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
I think you're really speaking to the interdependence that oftentimes we go about our lives unaware of how crucial and critical these daily
Mhm.
processes are of water
Mhm.
and sunshine and weather that we've become somewhat insulated
Mhm.
from in the modern world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, how does our mental health benefit from time in nature?
Yeah, it's kind of like what we were talking about. I mean, I think there's a few different levels. There's purely physiological level. Our physical body is beneficial. Again, we have to preface it by saying time in a healthy natural setting, or in a safe natural setting, or a setting that's compatible with what the person wants to do. Now, I might be well, it could be any number of things. Say I'm a swimmer and I like to go swimming, and I might go swimming in a big lake or something way far out, or even swimming in the ocean, say. But you've got to know how to swim, and you've got to want to be out there, and it could be quite fun. But if you get tossed out there and you don't know how to swim very well, it could be very uncomfortable or even dangerous, right? So when we say benefit, we're making a basic assumption that the person's in a healthy and safe setting, or something place where they want to be. If I'm on howling windstorm on the side of Mount Hood, but I'm an experienced mountain climber and I've chosen to go there, then that could be a great experience for me. So it really is it is the fit. There's a fit piece. But if we're in a natural place where we do feel that fit, then we get a sense of physiological benefit. We can get exercise. We can do things that make us feel happy or proud, or test ourselves. We can do things social with our friends. Um, um, it gives us reflection time. For some people, it's spiritual. There's all kinds of different levels. So we have physical, we have psychological, we have cultural, we have spiritual benefits, depending on the person.
Mhm. You may have just answered this next question, but I'll ask to see if there's any more to unpack there. Is there any part of being outdoors that could have a negative impact on mental health? Obviously, being out of your realm of comfort too far is one of those, but is there anything else?
Sure. I mean, if we think of just being outdoors as an objective state, I mean, any number of things can happen outdoors that are not healthy for us. We could be injured. People could be in a dangerous environment. Um, they could hurt themselves through falling, or some accident that could happen. There could be dangerous people or something unsafe going on. Nature can be dangerous. I mean, in Oregon, we don't have too much of a problem with this, but you can, there are certain places where we're not on top of the food chain, where there are, animals that might be dangerous, like bears or something like that. Pretty rare. I mean, the odds of any of us being killed by a wild animal are so slim compared to being hit by a car, any number of things. So we tend to exaggerate these risks, but that doesn't mean that there aren't risks. People get lost in the desert and die of dehydration. People die every year. Some climbers die on Mount Hood through accidents. So it's not that it's perfectly safe. So there is risk in outdoor activities, much like there's risk in anything. But one interesting piece of this is, lately people have developed some concerns about being outdoors, because being outdoors is troubling for them because of heat, because of climate change, essentially because of heat, because of smoke, because of danger of fire, poor air quality. So that's a tough problem of the modern era. As we know right now, as we're recording, there's huge and dangerous severe heat waves all around the country, particularly in the South and Florida and Texas, that can be deadly. The human body can only stand so much heat. And then we've had intense flooding in Vermont and New York State. So these are disasters, right? These are heat, and so of course those things are dangerous for us. And so unfortunately, we're in a place now where some people that really love being outdoors feel a barrier of going out, because when they do, they feel grief or loss or concern, or they don't trust the weather. So that's something we're all kind of working through. So like anything else, we have to be aware of the risks and benefits of things. And some people might have had losses, injuries, traumas in the outdoors. Could be an accident, could be some sort of interpersonal assault or injury. So we have to, again, that again is yet another reason to come back to that diversity. So in general, we can make a broad assumption that being in a healthy outdoor place is beneficial for most people most of the time. Just like a good diet is beneficial for most people, or practicing mindfulness or exercising, it's beneficial for most people most of the time. So we can generally recommend it. But that doesn't mean people don't get injured when exercising, or don't over exercise, or get out of their comfort zone. So so there are negative impacts, and we want to kind of try to reduce those, particularly if we're leading hikes or working with people. We want to think about the risks. Some of it comes down to basics like the 10 essentials. When you're camping, you want to have water, and you want to have extra layer of clothes, and some food, and some sunscreen, and a map. And if we have these kind of preparatory things, then we're going to be safer. The people that end up getting lost and getting hurt often are the people that don't take those precautions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you talked a bit about the climate change piece, and last year when I taught this class, there were some wildfires in September, so the air quality was hazardous, and students with health concerns or who weren't comfortable going outside because of the hazards outdoors here in Portland had to find other ways of completing the exercise for the week. So I'm curious, if that happens again this year, this class, is there any tools you recommend for students to manage maybe some of the eco-anxiety that does come up for them in that process? And as we go forward in life in general, as more climate emergencies take place. I think it'd be relevant to both of those scenarios.
Yeah, there's a lot of practical things. The funny thing is, I was just reading about this. People habituate in different weathers, and there's a general expectation that it takes about 2 years for people to get used to something. So like in a couple of years, the storms and fires that we're having, people will be used to it. It'll become the new normal. That's not necessarily a happy thing to think about, but we do adapt to things. But there's practical things we can do, like we can wear a mask, like an N95 mask during like a smoke event. We'll filter most of the smoke, so that, you know, that's helpful. If we're going to be hiking and it's hot, we want to kind of go early in the morning or in the evening when it's cooler, or we want to avoid particularly places with no shade, and we want to wear the right clothing, so we can get smarter. There's an old saying in the outdoors, you know, it's there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad gear, right? So if we have the right stuff, humans can survive in almost any climate. Humans have settled every area of the earth except Antarctica, right? Many thousands of years ago. So we can survive in all kinds of environments, but we have to have the right gear. We have to stay hydrated and all that sort of stuff. So some of it is practical, and others of it is more philosophical. I mean, we have to, our concerns about nature and climate change is not a wall, it's a doorway. It's a doorway to go through and figure out how we're going to move to the other side, and still retain our love for nature, because it's not the earth's fault. It's not the trees' fault. It's not the animals' fault. So we can still love the earth and get out in nature. But it is kind of a rite of passage for people right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little bit about diversity, and so I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about inequality and access to nature and how that impacts mental health.
Yeah, that's a big part that comes with the, along with diversity. When we talk about diversity, we often will talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So recognizing differences, trying to have people have equitable access to all kinds of resources in the world, and being included, right? So that comes out in the out of doors. And then another term or concept is environmental justice. So it's sort of like, is there fair access both to healthy green spaces and also protection from unhealthy, polluted areas? And so there's a pattern in the US and in most parts of the world where the people that have least power and privilege have to put up with more pollution, live closer to polluting industries, have less access to tree cover in their neighborhoods, have less access to nice parks. Even in Portland, we can see the different neighborhoods based on wealth and privilege about trees and access to parks and things like that. So that all comes up, and that's, I probably actually should have named that quite at the beginning when you asked me about diversity, because that's often a lens that people see there. We haven't talked about environmental identity, but this concept of my relationship with nature, like those two circles, self and nature, for some people that environmental identity is looked at through a lens of justice and or lack or injustice, So so access issues is important. It could be someone, having a place be open to people of different genders, different sexual orientations, different races, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different levels of ability. Is a trail accessible? Are things accessible to people who have needs for, different needs for mobility and things like that? So that's a big place, and a lot of times we'll have blind spots about that, because if that issue doesn't affect us personally, then we're not aware of it. So that's another piece where this diversity question is interesting. Like, I don't know, you've done this exercise, I guess we call it the privilege walk, right? Where you kind of go in a field, are you doing that exercise in this class?
No, but I would love to do some online version of it. We don't have
Yeah.
any face-to-faces planned, but yeah, I think that would be a
Yeah.
great exercise.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know that you've done this exercise where people stand in a field and they take one step depending on like what their access is to nature and whether they've had healthy green spaces, whether they've had mentors, whether they've been trained to be in the outdoors. And quickly we see the difference between people that have been lucky enough or privileged enough and the people that are kind of left behind. And that's a great exercise that reveals these kind of blind spots.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna we'll try to integrate that. I think that'd be really interesting to kind of get a
Mhm.
benchmark for where people are coming into this class.
Mhm.
In the past, this used to be a backpacking class, and I'll just share a brief story here. We had a student of color in the class who had some trauma related to racial issues, and was nervous to go on the overnight trip with the class. And so that, being a person of privilege and being from a white background, um, getting the opportunity to understand her perspective and where she was coming from was really eye-opening. And so I think, that's kind of a real life example of how people may feel differently heading into an activity outside, whether that's hiking or backpacking. And some people feel more vulnerable outdoors than other people do, and more welcome or not.
Yeah. I mean, an exercise that's fun that I know you've done is like a timeline of your life, an eco timeline, just a timeline of your life and different experiences regarding nature and the natural world, where you grew up, your parents, your family, where you went to school, what you learned, experiences being in the outdoors, whether at your home or neighborhood or with pets, travel, all that sort of stuff. And that timeline is really telling. It'll help you to understand a person's sense of their relationship, both their strengths, their weaknesses, what they feel fitting for them or not. Positive things, but also, losses and traumas. So that's something I will do either formally or informally with people that I work with in therapy, because it helps me to kind of map their life, and then it gives me a good sense of their life regarding nature and the natural world.
Yeah, thank you. It can be a really eye-opening experience to be able to put that down and understand how these experiences influence the relationship with nature or concerns about
Mm-hmm.
the environment.
Mm-hmm.
I've just got a few questions left for you. Can you describe to us what nature deficit disorder is?
Yeah, that's a curious term. That's a kind of a pop culture term. It came out of a book called "The Last Child in the Woods" by Richard Louv, who's a journalist. And it was a really kind of impactful book because it just helped people understand how children's access to green spaces in nature had changed over recent generations, to where in modern times many children don't have access to parks and kind of open green spaces, you know, yards, areas behind your house where you can go hike in woods that aren't formally a park or that aren't formally like a nature trail, riversides, seasides, woods, forests, climbing trees, building tree houses. A lot of traditional child play activities have kind of gone away. And it's kind of a wake up call for parents who realize when they were kids, they were kind of able to run around and go do things without too much structure or oversight or supervision. Many parents or people of a certain age will say, well, my parents would just say, come back when the street lights come on. So you could just kind of go run around in the neighborhood. And then our culture has changed a lot in various ways, um, about that. Either feelings of unsafety, risk and liability, all these things. So, and then with the rise of screens and technology, there's, the last couple generations of children have really spent less time in nature than their previous generations. And that's where that term nature deficit disorder, it's kind of play on words. It's a play on like attention deficit disorder, ADHD. But the idea that, if you don't get enough time in nature, it's a form of a problem. It isn't an official mental disorder, but it's a term that's speaking to, loss of loss of time in healthy green spaces, and how that kind of diminishes our life.
Hmm.
And then it helps, it gives, then people struggle to understand their relationship with nature and what they should do about climate change or other issues, because they haven't built up a positive sense of connection and interbeing.
Hmm. Mhm.
It's hard to love or protect something you don't understand or know about.
Right. Yeah, especially.
Mhm.
Um, see if there's anything else before we transition to this last piece. So those are all the questions I have for the mental health piece. And in our next week, we'll be focusing on the spiritual benefits of time outdoors, time in nature. And so this is a little bit off topic for this particular week, but maybe we can kind of copy and paste your answer to the next week. So I am curious how time in nature can impact someone's sense of spiritual well-being. Curious.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, their spiritual life and their time in nature outdoors are quite related. So I think it's a fair question. It might not necessarily always come up in the more scientific context, but in some of the work I'm doing now and with people's relationship with nature and coping during the era of climate change, I do, in addition to helping people get over their concerns and their anxieties, we talk about what it would mean to thrive in the modern world in relation to nature. And some of that thriving is being able to go in the outdoors and do adventures and create our own challenges. And my equation is resource divided by challenge times meaning. So it's like I have my resources and I calibrate the challenge, but then I think about what it means for me. So like I may take on a very challenging thing that's way out of my comfort zone if it has meaning for me, like if I really want to do it. Like I've never hiked in Forest Park, I'm going to go do that. Or I've never camped overnight by myself, or I've never walked a half marathon or something like that. So there's the meaning piece. So and so there's the arts. There's another piece where people's relationship with nature comes in terms of music, all kinds of arts, reading, poetry, novels, visual arts, painting, sculpture, collecting natural objects. That's a form of flourishing in terms of our relationship with nature. And spirituality, for many people, their deepest, whether it's through an organized religion, through Christianity, or through their own self-created spiritual beliefs, they'll find their kind of connection with a higher power in a natural setting. I mean, all the great religious traditions feature people going out into nature. Jesus spent time in the desert. The Buddha sat under a tree. The Jewish people, wandered in the desert. There's a strong and very long-standing link between time spent in nature and religious experience. You could think of monks and monasteries and various things. It's popular for people to go to Europe and travel these different caminos, these different pilgrimage routes, which are traditional religious pilgrimage routes, but where people will do this as kind of an outdoor adventure. Then, of course, you have indigenous spirituality, views about nature that are more about people being related to nature and, tradition, Native American traditions. So yet another reason to talk about diversity, right? Because people come at it from a lot of different directions. But I've yet to come across, someone who didn't have some spiritual connection with nature. It just depends on how it's translated through their belief system. And then that leads to interesting questions about like a role of stewardship in nature, taking care of nature versus using nature. And obviously that gets into all kinds of philosophy about what is humans' roles in nature and the natural world. But I think it's a very juicy topic to think about. That we, like a lot of things, we take it for granted. Mm-hmm. Even our art and nature relationship, right? When people think about it, they surround themselves. I have this photo on the wall behind me. I have different natural objects and things like that. And that's not uncommon for people to be surrounded by all that kind of stuff. But we don't necessarily realize it. Or obviously if you garden or have flowers or plants or landscaping, there's all that. So there's a lot of sort of creative energy in this space.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all the questions I've got. Do you have any questions that I didn't ask that I should have asked that would be relevant to students doing a hiking class? trying to make the most of their time in nature and their mental health?
No, I think we covered it. We covered a lot of bases. I mean, you did say that there's a lot of, non-traditional students in your class that are older, and they might be parents themselves. And so that would be another thing to, point to raise, is that as parents, we're kind of responsible to help our children develop a healthy environmental identity. And much of our environmental identities were influenced by our parents and how our parents, acted, either officially or unofficially regarding nature and the natural world. So it's a neat opportunity. And I know for some parents it's a source of stress and concern, like how are my children going to fare, in a climate change world. So there's that piece of it that we want to validate. But as a parent, you can model being in nature. It's okay to be outside, finding comfort in nature, being comfortable in different weathers, not having unreasonable fears of getting dirty or being outside or going to the bathroom in the woods or any of these kinds of things. Teaching kids how to tread lightly in the woods and not litter, and how to more leave no trace kinds of camping principles and hiking principles. So that's another area. And then there's a larger piece of trying to protect the areas that we go walking in, that we take care of them, that we don't litter, that we pick up litter, that we're respectful to other people. We do our best to try to help preserve these areas in whatever way that's hopeful, and supporting environmental or natural, initiatives for green space. Having a spectrum of nature from urban walks to more rural to more wilderness walks, and kind of being comfortable at those different levels. Yeah, it's a great topic.
Thank you. I appreciate this conceptualization of the intergenerational passing along of values.
Mm-hmm.
How impactful that will be, not only for kids' well-being, but the well-being of the earth as well.
Yeah. And it's never too late to have a second childhood, as they say. So it's never late. It's never too late to do experiences you might not have been lucky enough to have. I didn't have a traditional outdoor. Some of the people I know and work with, they grew up on a farm, or they grew up where there was big woods and they're out in nature. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, in more of an urban setting, and didn't have any kind of idyllic background, but I did do a lot of things, particularly in my 20s and after college. So it's never too late to learn skills, camping, outdoor skills, and fill in the gaps, in terms of comfort. Growing up means not just leaving childhood behind, but it means integrating things from childhood in different, like play and make believe and competency and learning how to build things, integrating all that into our adult life.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your expertise and wisdom with us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Aimee, and good luck. And students can contact me. You can find me at my website at selfsustain.com. And I have a podcast where we talk about nature and climate change, climatechangeandhappiness.com, Climate Change and Happiness podcast. We get into these kind of topics. I'll stop the recording and then we can wrap up. Good luck with your class.
Okay, thank you so much.